Welcome back to Java Space. So in this video we are going to talk about the Dispatcher Servlet. Permit me to say this. If you started coding before Spring Boot was introduced, you should have come across Dispatcher Servlet. You should have come across the view resolver. But if you started coding after the introduction of Spring Boot, chances are that you don't even know that this thing exists. Alright, so what is the Dispatcher Servlet? Dispatcher Servlet is also known as a front controller. All requests that come to your Spring Boot application, they pass through this front controller. It's like a gateway. From the front controller, requests can then be mapped to where they need to go. So Spring MVC, like any other web framework, is designed around the front controller or the front controller pattern, where we have a central servlet called the Dispatcher Servlet. And this Dispatcher Servlet provides us with an algorithm to process the request. When the request comes, it knows how to delegate the request to all the configured components in our Spring application. And this model is very flexible, and you can actually provide many workflows that you want. So the Dispatcher Servlet is a servlet itself, and just like any other servlet in Java, it has to be declared, it has to be mapped according to the servlet specification, and you can achieve that using Java configuration or using XML. So the Dispatcher Servlet, as I have mentioned, delegates to special beans to process the request and to render the response that needs to be rendered. Alright, so why are we saying it delegates to special beans? These special beans are Spring managed object instances that implements the framework contracts, and those usually come with built-in contracts. But because Spring is highly customizable, you can customize it using your own properties. You can extend those, you can even replace them if you wish to. So before Spring Boot, because Spring Boot does auto configuration for us, it comes with opinions that it actually lays for you on the table. So based on what you have in the class path, based on what you have in the environment variable, the property files, it will configure certain beans for you. So before Spring Boot, you had to configure the Dispatcher Servlet yourself, and you could configure it using Java configuration, or you can configure it, as you can see here, using the XML. So one of the configurations of the Dispatcher Servlet is you have to do handler mapping. You have to configure how you want the mappings to be done. As you can see here, we are adding a mapping. We also have it here. All right. Another thing you had to configure when you are not in a Spring Boot project, you had to configure the view resolver. The view resolver is responsible for giving us the view that can render the model to produce a response object that goes to the user. So it knows where the JSP files are. It knows where the template files are. It knows where the HTML files are. And then it will go to those files and then produce the HTML document or JSP, whatever you want to call it. Then it returns the response back to the user. Although it's not the view resolver that do the return. So what it does, it will just tell the Dispatcher Servlet that this is the view that can render the model. Then the Dispatcher Servlet will call that view to render the model and will return the response. All right. So in Spring Boot, what you do is all that this work of configuring the dispatcher servlet and the review resolver has been cut off. So what you need to do, you just need to include this dependency in your project, Spring Boot Starter Web, then everything will be, configured for you. So this dependency brings a whole lot of other dependencies for you. It brings Spring Web MVC, Spring Boot Starter JSON, and embedded Chromcat. So these two, Spring Web and Spring Web MVC, according to the official documentation from Spring, the Spring Web module provides basic-oriented integration features such as multi-path file upload functionality and initialization of the IOC container using servlet listeners and a web-oriented application context. So web-oriented. So this application context is only relevant in Spring Web application. So in my other video where I was talking about, application context, I mentioned quite a number of them there. You can actually follow that video to see what I was talking about. So it also contains an HTTP client and the web-related parts of the Spring's remoting support. So the Spring Web MVC module, also known as the Web Servlet module, contains Spring's Model View Controller, MVC, and the REST Web Services implementation of the web applications. So Spring's MVC framework provides a clean separation between domain, model code, and web forms, and integrates with all other features of Spring framework. So the Spring Boot Starter Web will give you auto configuration. The Spring Boot Starter JSON will bring Jackson, a library for you, which is responsible for converting models into JSON to other, format like XML, PDFs, HQL, and all that. Then the embedded Tomcat is the servlet container that now runs and does request processing of your request. So I want us to look at this diagram here. So when the request comes to your Spring application, first it hits the dispatcher servlet, the front controller. The front controller does not know who can handle this request, does not know the controller that can handle this request. So the dispatcher servlet will ask the handler mapping to say who can handle this request. The handler mapping will say, okay, this is the controller that can handle this request. So it will introspect the request. Then the dispatcher servlet will then delegate to the handler adapter. It will not go to the controller directly, because remember that the request comes with a whole lot of things: headers, parameters, path variables, request parameters, and all that. So for that to correctly fit to the controller or be compatible with the controller, the handler adapter will have to adapt that call to the controller. And this controller is what you as a developer must implement, and also a view. So can you imagine you have all this beautiful implementation that is properly done and with complex code written for you already, and you only need to give implementation for these two things. This is the beauty of Spring MVC. All right, so once the handler mapping has adapted that request to a controller, the controller will do processing. It will call a service, which will call a repository if that's the way you have built your application. Then it will return a response back to the dispatcher servlet. The response can say two things to the dispatcher servlet. It can say render the view, or it can say return a JSON response, return XML response, return HQL, return a PDF document. Many things can happen, but that depends on several things, as we will see. So all right, so if the controller is telling the dispatcher servlet to return to render this to a view, to render the response to a view, the dispatcher servlet does not know which view, which file, which HTML file, which JSP file, time-lived templates, velocity, all that can be able to render the model to the view and then the response will be returned. So it has to ask the view resolver to tell it which file is actually able to render the model for this particular response. All right. So once the dispatcher servlet has known which view will do that using the view resolver, then it will call the view and give it a model. Then the view would render that, then the response will go back. But if it's saying return a JSON, then the dispatcher servlet does not know how to return that object as a JSON. So it will have to ask the message converter to convert that object to JSON or XML as will need be. So these are the components that make up the request processing as we can see on the diagram. They are thoroughly explained here. The view resolver, it says resolve logical stream-based view names returned from a handler to an actual view with which to render the response. And then we also have local resolver, which is basically when you are doing internationalization in your project, where you are dealing with different time zones, different languages, different countries, and all that. Then we have themes. If your application has several themes, maybe dark theme, light theme, or yellow theme, whatever themes you have, this is the guide to actually help you with that. And handler exception resolver, which will actually help you to resolve exception. So server-side rendering flow. So server-side rendering flow, the request comes, then it goes to a handler mapping. The handler mapping, takes back, tells the dispatcher servlet who can handle the request. The request goes to that controller. The controller returns a model and a logical view name. Then the dispatcher servlet does not know that logical view name. Basically, it's just the name of the file. Then it will ask the view resolver who can actually render this. Then the view resolver will say, okay, based on this name, this is the file that can render the model. And then the dispatcher servlet will call that file, and the model will be rendered. The response will be returned. This is on the side of server side, all right, where you are returning a logical, view name. So how can you achieve that? You can achieve that in several ways. So as you can see here, we are just returning a string. And if you return a string here and you're in a Spring Boot environment, Spring Boot has a default location where you will find the views, So it will try to look for that view that is being returned here in that location, which actually is in resources template folder. All right. So once it has, let me just show you in the project quickly. So if you resources template, so it will look for that view in here. All right. So, or if you do not want to actually do it like this, which I believe is the best because it does not really tie your project to a framework specific, contracts or framework specific classes, like when you say model and view. All right. So you can return model and view, and then this is how you actually will tell Spring where to find the view. So this is the view page. It will actually designate the name of the file that needs to render that model, and then return back the response to whoever is calling, and then you return this model and view. Or if you do not want to declare it when you are instantiating this object, you can call the set view name of the model and view, and then return that. Then it will still achieve the same thing that is being achieved here. All right. So the client side flow, that is where we do not want to resolve to a view resolver. we do not want to use a view resolver to render the response. All right. So what the controller will do, it just returns a pojo or a domain object. Then the dispatcher servlet does not know how to return this object to the caller. So it will call a message converter to say, I have this object, can you please convert this object to something I can send to the requester? All right, then the message converter can convert this based on your own configuration to JSON, to XML, PDF, GraphQL, and many other formats that let's just show you that quickly. So if you come here, you come to media types. So these are all the media types that are applicable. So you have all application at home, XML, application CBO, from GraphQL, JSON value. Then you have application JSON UTF. You have PDF is here, PDF value. You have XML. Then you have XML value. Notice that this is not a constant value, but this one is a constant value, which means somewhere this is given some value. All right. So this is, as you can see, we have quite a number of them that you can. So this is a media type, what you can return back to the caller. All right. So this is what you can actually call. So what you can, the types of documents or responses that the dispatcher servlet can return back based on your own configuration. So this is done by a message converter. So this is how you would typically configure your REST backend. So you will want to use a REST controller. Notice this is the previous one, you just have a controller and then you're returning a string here. But this one you have a REST controller and then you are returning a domain object. So what Spring will do is it will put this object in the body of the response. All right, it will put it in the body of the response. This is what the controller, a REST controller, is doing. If you do not want to use it like this, because this address controller is an annotation that includes a controller and a response body. All right. So if you look at this, we have a controller. Then here we have added a response body. Then obviously this will be put in the body of the request. All right. Assuming that we do not put this at response body, we are just returning book. The controller then will try to resolve this object to a view in our project, but it will not be able to do that because this is a domain object. Okay, let's try that in code quickly and see. So I have already run this project. As you can see here, I have a controller. I'm returning this object in this method here, in this handler method here. All right, then path variable ID. I want us to try and call that method and see what we will get. So let's call this method. Let's see that, say 404, no resource found exception, which means Spring was unable to do view resolution for this object. So if we want to tell Spring that this does not need to go to the view resolver to resolve the view that can render the response, this has to go to the body of the response. We have to call this, add this annotation at response body. So let's call this second one 2 and see what comes back to us. Now we get the object that has been converted to JSON. All right, if we do not want to actually add a response body, we can use response entity. All right, let's use the handler with this mapping 3. So I'm gonna put 3 here. Let's run the code. we still get the same thing. All right, so this is how you can achieve that. So thank you guys for watching this video. See you in the next video. More videos are still coming, and I hope you find this content useful for you. Please don't forget to subscribe.